The Spin-off Podcast Network.
Are you making the most of your KiwiSaver investment? Generate is an award-winning KiwiSaver provider with a track record of strong long-term performance. Making a smart decision now could add tens of thousands of dollars by the time you reach retirement. Book a no-obligation chat with a Generate KiwiSaver advisor today at generatekiwisaver.co.nz/get-advice. A copy of the product disclosure statement is available at generatekiwisaver.co.nz. The issuer of the scheme is Generate Investment Management Limited, and of course, past performance does not guarantee future returns.
Estou passando nesse podcast para dividir uma informação que fez toda a diferença na minha vida. Quer fazer pós-graduação, mas tá impossível correr de um lugar para o outro?
Pois é, ainda mais com o trânsito.
Então você precisa conhecer a educação à distância do Senac. Sabia que é nota máxima no MEC? E tem diversos cursos de pós-graduação para te levar ainda mais longe. 100% online, sem necessidade de TCC e com acesso direto a todos os professores.
Ah, saber isso fez diferença sim.
Inscreva-se já na pós-graduação EAD. Quer saber? Senac EAD.
And I'm like, yes, sister.
Oh, wait, I've got a bit. No, we'll say, no, wait, it's not a bit. Sorry, I thought I had a bit. But
Did you have a bit? But
no. Tēnā koutou katoa, this is Gone By Lunchtime. My name is Toby, man. Here's Annabelle Matha, kia ora.
Kia ora.
Here's Ben Thomas, kia ora.
Morena.
Helping us today is Tina Tiller. Lovely to have you back there, lighting the room up. Thank you also to Spin-off members. Is there anyone else we want to thank?
No thanks to Taxinder. No help for small town Main Street mum and dad PR firms. In this year's budget. The Kiwi battlers.
Another bad budget for the propagandists of the political lobbying and PR industry.
Yeah, when do we get a good one?
The massive inequity you guys face, in your industry. So unfair.
Take a moment, everybody, to think about that and reflect on what you've done. What have you done for the PR industry? Listener?
Have you committed any indiscretions recently? Have you created a new government department? Just think of ways you could help out.
Have you helped to foment a crisis that needs solving? A reputational crisis, I mean.
Is there something you need to hide?
Do people come to you sometimes? Do you ever do that sort of stuff? Like if there's some terrible Annabelle exposes me for all the terrible stuff I've done, can I come to you and say, Ben, help me out? How do I deal with this? Is that something is on your rack of goods?
Yeah, so, I mean, it's not something I've done a lot of recently.
Okay.
You sort of, yeah. I mean, obviously, you just give people advice. You know, honesty is usually the best policy. But not in your own words. You're an idiot amateur.
Do you slip into
need
people?
honesty under the guiding hand of a professional.
Right.
You know, don't get carried away.
Yeah. You just send out the email.
That's right, yeah.
But do you slip into people's DMs? Like if you see them getting smashed on Twitter?
Yeah, that's right. just sort of like DM slides to like, you know, and you're like, wow, you seem to be going through a really tough time. My rates are as follows.
0800 Ben TPR. The budget was on Thursday, and it was another recent times we've had a lot of kind of quite interesting 1991 retro. It's like a great big television episode harking back to 1991 because we had all the fair pay agreement stuff, the Jim Bolger loop. And in presenting the budget, Grant Robertson invoked 1991 and the infamous mother of all budgets. And he didn't call it this, but he should have called it, therefore, the matricide budget.
The what?
The matricide, but, you know, like, not like kill your mother budget.
Oh, right, okay.
Yeah, or like, because it also included $700 million for rail upgrades, the throw mama from the train budget.
Or maybe
Do you
we
guys
should
remember
just...
that movie?
I do,
That's
yeah.
a movie. If you
Danny
remember
DeVito?
the budget,
Danny
you remember
DeVito.
that movie. They're the same era.
In fact, that's what Ruth Richardson was thinking of. In fact, she was watching that film on VHS as she jotted down all the plans to impoverish the country.
Maybe we should just change the name of that budget to the Mother Effer budget.
Okay.
Seems like a very apt name for it now.
Grant Robertson, the Minister of Finance, said that this budget would be righting the wrongs of those 1991 decisions, which saw benefits slashed dramatically. And, it was quite startling. I didn't see anyone really pick the boost to benefits that were announced on budget day. $20 a week as of July, I think, and then beyond that, anywhere between sort of 40-something and 55 for some beneficiaries in the years to come, costing $3.3 billion. And it's like Annabelle, for a long time, since 1991, it's almost been sort of taboo to increase benefits because there has been an accepted wisdom that middle New Zealand doesn't like benefits, and so
get a real job, like sending out press releases about sexual harassers.
While you might do, things like working for families and all sorts of schemes and bolt-ons and things, but leave the benefit rates have for the most part, were increased, for example, under the COVID budget a little, for the most part been left untouched, and yet the advice from the welfare expert advisory group and a lot of other expert advice was that if you really want to deal with, for example, child poverty, you need to increase base benefits. That's what. And now, not everything in the welfare advisory group was done, but this was a major decision.
It was a step in the right direction, but obviously there's still disappointment because it doesn't increase it enough. And those recommendations came out a few years ago now, so the increases being talked about, if you live in Auckland, wouldn't even rent you a letterbox here for a week. So, yeah, I think, the government's to be applauded for increasing benefits. But again, $20, $30, $50 doesn't go very far in a shopping trolley nowadays.
Were you surprised, Ben?
I was picking probably around $30. My expectation was that they would go a little further than those two benefit bumps that both the previous national government and the Labour government and the Labour New Zealand First Coalition did last term, which was in total about $45. So we've seen since, I think, was it 2016 that Key and English raised benefits. We've seen little incremental increases, which was where that sort of taboo was broken, that you just don't raise benefits, except by CPI or now wage inflation.
Yeah.
So I was expecting 30, 50. That's a lot. 50 per adult. It's $100 for a couple. So, or $110 for a couple as of next year. It's the equivalent for somebody on the average salary of about $82,000 of getting a 3% tax cut on their effective tax rate. It's like for any income earner having the first $20,000 of income tax free. So it is significant in terms of that narrow band of sort of personal hip pocket increases that parties campaign on, like for tax cuts or working for families. It's a significant boost. It's probably not quite as significant, as Annabelle said, as Robertson is making out. And, Robertson is a guy who is very good at political PR. And so he's tied this back, to this huge bogeyman in Labour and left-wing circles, which is the mother of all budgets. And he's providing a sort of sense of narrative satisfaction for this government to kind of, after the failures to transform and deliver in that first term, he's really trying to say, look, this is Labour. We're back. We've made amends for the past. I think it's been a while since Labour probably put the Roger Douglas reforms to bed in terms of its own legacy, but in terms of addressing that 90s
Yes, it was
legacy.
interesting that he was focused mainly on the national government.
Curious.
the one that came before, which, if I recall correctly, was a Labour government.
The first ACTA government of New Zealand.
That's right.
But you know, I mean, and I look, you know, from a PR perspective, I have a bit of sympathy for them that
Ben Thomas PR.
you know, they do deliver what is, you know, in the historical context of the last 30 years, a big increase to benefits. And people are like, well, it's a good start. You know, you're like, come on, let Grant Robertson just let him be celebrated and feted for one night for, you know, driving a stake through the heart of Richardsonism. Yeah, I think it is difficult for us to evaluate budgets now because post-COVID, just the magnitude of numbers that we're dealing with is so unreal compared to the last sort of 30 years of careful fiscal restraint, also ushered in by Ruth Richardson. And, you know, there was, you know, the $3.8 billion Housing Accelerator Fund, which the government sort of re-announced with a big splash in the budget, because when they announced it in March, nobody even noticed.
Yeah.
You know, $3.8 billion, that's huge expenditure.
Between friends. But there is that. But
I think that's why there's a little bit of disappointment, though, because during COVID we saw the establishment of a two-tier benefit system where the government could afford to be more generous to people who lost their jobs through COVID. And so, you know, along with the recommendations of the working group, there's an expectation that there will be a more generous approach to beneficiaries, particularly if we're serious about lifting kids out of child poverty.
And
so $50, obviously it's better than what there's been in the past, but still not far enough.
And I think David Seymour, you know, harking back to that ACT thing, is he was the only person I think who raised what was actually Richardson's major ideological argument for lower benefits, which was that having, you know, quote unquote high benefit rates disincentivizes people returning to work. And figures out recently show, I think I saw, we now have just under 120,000 people who have been on the job seeker benefit or a main benefit for more than a year. And that's up about 100% on this time on just before COVID. And it's long-term unemployment that really sort of digs into that kind of poverty trap, you know, whether you raise benefits, $50, $100, whatever. It's, you know, there is still a significant margin between work and being on a benefit. And that used to be the argument of the sort of neoliberals was if you disincentivize finding a job, people will get stuck in this poverty trap.
Well, that's a kind of posh way of saying the old they're sitting on their asses watching TV. That's the other version of that rhetoric.
Yeah, that's right. And I think Seymour, you know, refined it down. So he said, look, in Auckland, yeah, obviously that's not going to do much. You're not even keeping up with rent. If you're in one of the more far-flung rural communities, jobs are harder to come by. You know, $50 can go a long way. And, you know, that's good in the sense that, you know, you're not going to be in as much poverty anymore. But, you know, is there a disincentive effect? And it was interesting that only ACT, you know, which is, you know, on the 90th percentile of right-wing views in New Zealand, even raised that issue.
Right.
It also ignores the fact that actually it's harder to get a job when you're really, really poor.
Yeah,
because to
absolutely.
get a job, it helps if you've got like access to the internet, so you can look for jobs. That you've got a working car, so you can, you know, go to job interviews and get to your jobs. That you're earning enough to be able to put your kid in childcare, and also that whether a person wants to work or not. And I believe that most people, if given the opportunity, do want to work. It's not their kids' fault. And kids shouldn't be punished for the actions of their parents.
And that was, in a way, that Richardson argument was jettisoned by John Key to some extent when he talked about the underclass when he came in. That was not about a kind of we need to. It wasn't a stick over carrot argument that he was making.
No, 100%. But I think that, and look, you know, it's not like the government is asleep at the wheel here. You know, there's a lot in the budget about creating jobs, a lot about skills training, which is incredibly important. The issue is going to be, you know, can they create the jobs? Can they get the money out the door? Can they get these projects going? Because a lot of their job creation is focused on government projects, stimulus through infrastructure, rather than what Judith Collins was suggesting, which is, cutting the costs for business so that they can sort of go off and do their own thing. And we saw that, $3.8 billion for housing again. Well, there was $2 billion for Kiwi Build, and it didn't get us much. Now there's $350 million for iwi housing, which is fantastic if it achieves anything. And I'm actually more hopeful for that, because I think iwi are better partners than the Ministry of Housing and Urban Development are. And I think that if iwi can get support for the infrastructure, they have land, they have people, what they need is skills and capacity training, and they need infrastructure, and then they can actually get about doing their own plans that don't rely on, government central planning or guidance.
The other thing, of course, when you put money into the pockets of the most hard up in the country, the money gets spent, whether it's spent on food, on raincoats, on petrol, it gets spent. The money goes back into the economy. So it isn't. And Kurt Cope from Business New Zealand said the benefit rises could have been a bit more for that reason. There you go. You mentioned a moment ago, Annabelle, the 2-tier unemployment rate.
Well, we have
post-COVID.
good news for you.
And it was really a plan outlined in the budget, which is, not absolutely usual, but interesting for social unemployment insurance. And this idea, and it's the CTU and Business NZ are meant to be involved in the design of this new scheme. But there are Nordic models. Canada has one. Various other parts of the world have them. The idea is there would be a levy charged to business who, in a sort of slightly ACC-ish way, and then if you fall out of work, you have that safety net that's quite a lot higher than the other safety net. Do you think that is a sensible way forward?
I have real concerns about it, because I think what we can see already from ACC is that they do everything they can to not support people. And there's massive inequity in the system. So I worry that setting up another system that's kind of loosely based on that philosophy is going to cause more hardship. And what's wrong with the safety system that we already have? Just provision it properly.
Yeah, I think the argument is it's not enough for those things you were talking about, which is so the rationale for the employment and unemployment insurance is that people's lives don't become unduly disrupted in between work. So, as
you don't fall into a spiral of missing bills.
Yeah, that's right. Because the poorer you get, the harder things get. If you miss your mortgage payments, say, then you've got to find more homes. That makes job seeking harder. You disrupt your kids from school, that kind of thing. So, it is a sop to middle class people, most broadly, I think. But there is.
But it'll be funded by working class people.
Well,
they'll miss out on the benefits of it, which is what we see already with ACC.
Well, I think it'll be funded by everyone. I think there'll probably be a lot of cross subsidisation, and just like there is with ACC, just like there is with any insurance scheme, because most people aren't unemployed. It's much rarer. In people's working lifetimes, most people don't lose their jobs, and most people are only unemployed for a short period of time. There is only a core of about sort of 2%, say, that are long-term unemployed at any given time. Now we're up to about 3-4%, but it would, well, no, we shouldn't say unemployed, because being on the job seeker doesn't mean you're unemployed. It just might mean you're working fewer hours. But apparently, and I'm no expert on this, like the Nordic countries have this, it actually increases support it tends to increase support for higher benefit levels, because the middle classes feel like they're getting out of it as well. I think there's something to that. That's an old sort of precept of New Zealand's welfare state, and is why even beneficiaries nominally pay tax, which is that everyone's paying in and everyone's getting out. So everyone feels these sort of citizenship rights or whatever. And there is this idea, because I don't think that most of the middle classes did feel close enough to precarity last year for it to really affect their long-term views about welfare. I think the reason that welfare increases were possible in this budget is because of how well off the middle classes felt because of soaring house prices, because they've saved money from their Bali trips during lockdown, and they've seen what's happening in the rest of the world. And so comparatively, they feel very good. In the budget, it says, house price inflation will slow to 1% in the next year. And that means, I think, next year you would not be able to get away with an announcement like this.
Hey, Annabelle.
Toby.
You're, as the producer of the new Mike Hosking show, what's taken over the Mike Hosking show is the home of regular interviews with the Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern. I believe you had on the Hui last night with Mihi Hosking. Jacinda Ardern. Tell me about that.
Mike Forbes. Mihi covered a story last week about a whānau whose 13-year-old son suffers with cystic fibrosis.
Oh, yeah.
And obviously they want to access Trikafta, which is the new wonder drug that's massively enhancing the life of cystic fibrosis sufferers and extending their lives, which I think most pass away around 37. And they marched to Parliament with Patients' Voices, which is led by Malcolm Mulholland, asking for Trikafta to be included in the list of medicines subsidised by Pharmac. I think it costs around $400,000 a year for someone to take Trikafta. And they were hoping, obviously, that there'd be a massive funding boost for Pharmac. Obviously, they were disappointed with the announcement that only $200 million extra has been given to Pharmac, because the way Pharmac works, they have a list of medicines, and they have to fund whatever's at the top of the list first, and at the moment Trikafta isn't even on the list. So that $200 million will be spent on other stuff, and those kids won't even get a look in. So that's what
you guys
that's what the Prime Minister was talking about.
Because in a way, the principle is that the politicians shouldn't be speaking to the specific examples, right? Like that's devolved to Pharmac in terms of making those particular decisions.
Well, that's what she said, is that Pharmac should never be politically influenced, and that it has to have its own mana motuhake. But I think at a pragmatic level, that's not really how it works. I think if the government cops enough heat about something, and we've seen it with other drugs in the past, the breast cancer,
Herceptin.
Yeah,
so that was in
2008,
and my understanding is that announcement, which was made by a junior MP during the campaign, was actually a mistake. They put out a promise that they would independently fund Herceptin, outside of Pharmac. It wasn't cleared through anyone. The MP just put it out, and then then everyone freaked out. But then they saw that it really helped in polling, and so they had to adopt it as policy. But it is a bad way to run, because and you see this in PR circles. All New Zealand branches of drug companies do is pay for media campaigns about people who need their very expensive drugs. Like, that's essentially the entire role of their branch offices in New Zealand.
Hey, hit me up, guys, because no one's come offering us any money, and we've done a few cystic fibrosis stories now. But one of the comments made by the Andrew Beecroft is that it could be argued that New Zealand was in breach of the UN's Declaration on Children's Rights, because children are supposed to be prioritised over other groups, and at the moment they're not. In terms of Pharmac, that's not the case.
The other thing with Herceptin and why these decisions shouldn't be political is that apparently Herceptin, I'm going to get the numbers wrong, but there was an 8-week course or a 14-week course. Obviously, the 14-week course was about twice as expensive. All of the evidence showed that the 8-week course was as, if not more, effective than the 14-week course. But because And I think the 8 weeks was what Labour went into the election on, but the 14-week course polled much higher. And so that ended up being funded. And this is why you shouldn't have political decisions on drugs, drug funding in New Zealand.
But the reality is that Pharmac is funded by the government, so it is sort of innately political in a sense, and the argument is that there should be much more funding for Pharmac, and that's again a political decision.
I'd just like to intercede here and point out that Ben Thomas is not a medical professional, and please don't take his advice on medicines you use or don't use. He is, however, a doctor of public relations.
I am an epidemiologist. I'm a COVID
0800 Ben Thomas, PR. We need to race through the last bits here because important people have important things to do. Very quickly, though.
Just other stuff in the budget.
Yes.
That caught my attention.
Yes. Any other stuff in the budget that caught your attention, Ben?
I thought the $50 billion to set up a separate Māori state. That was something that wasn't largely covered. I think that was in the DIA budget. $400,000 in the Māori development, Invoke Māori development, chillingly just titled Utu. Could have used a bit more explication by the government. $30,000 to mail a copy of the new bilingual constitution to every home. Yeah, but apart from that, not much to see, really.
The other announcement that came last week was an immigration reset, once in a generation, tum-tum-tum-tum-tum. Chris Farfoy had a cold or something, I think, so Stuart Nash read out his speech. It was reasonably, how to put it, reasonably ambiguous, nebulous, amorphous.
Confusing.
There wasn't a lot of specificity in it, but the broad thrust of it was more of the wealthy, skilled migrants and less of the low-skilled migrants. And who's on the phone? 0800 Ben Thomas, PR.
So that was me. That was my doctor's appointment from last week.
Oh.
Yeah.
Did you not make the appointment? Or?
Oh, no, I did.
Right. How'd it go?
Good.
Good.
Yeah.
It would be quite cool if you,
if it
was
here.
The doctor with some results, some test results. That would be a really good plot point.
It's just like positive.
Nice bit of jeopardy.
That's the cliffhanger ending
Yeah.
of the podcast.
Beautiful.
What did you make of all that, Annabelle Lee Mather? It, I don't know. It sort of slipped by a bit. It felt like there was a lot of discussion about migration in terms of productivity and almost like they're kind of talking about shipping containers or, like lines that were coming in and out of the warehouse rather than
a line coming out of Kmart, more like snaking line, zigzagging.
Well, yes, right. Like there is quite an important social and cultural thing related to immigration too. For my money, it makes the place a much better to have not just fancy, wealthy migrants, but low-skilled migrants. I didn't see, and maybe I missed it, but I don't think there was anything in the speech about the refugee quota, which I think remains the same. I don't know. I'm Toby Manhire, and this is Juggernaut, the story of the fourth Labour government. A podcast in 6 parts.
Doesn't give my opponents much time to run up to an election, does it?
This nation is at risk.
What do you think you're up to now, you perverted little liar?
I could smell the uranium on it as you lean towards it.
Most radical overhaul in the history of New Zealand's administration.
Juggernaut, the story of the fourth Labour government. Made with the support of New Zealand On Air. Listen now on The Spin-Off or wherever you get your podcasts.
Kia ora, I'm Duncan Grieve, founder of The Spin-Off. You can help us keep all of The Spin-Off's award-winning journalism free for everybody by becoming a member today at thespinoff.co.nz/donate.
To all politicians out there, if you keep saying a once in a lifetime, once in a generation,
Yep. I'm actually going to
opportunity about everything, it starts to lose its potency as a phrase.
It's crying wolf.
Can I just encourage everyone? Let's all save that one for very special occasions, very very rare events, not just any old policy that you're rolling out. Once in a generation opportunity to have lunch on a Thursday at Bellamy's. It's not like just dial it down a couple of clicks and save it for the really big stuff. In terms of a immigration reset, my view is that you actually can't have an immigration, as the Treaty of Waitangi is the original immigration document in New Zealand, you really can't have an immigration reset without the input of tangata whenua. And it's not really clear in this policy how tangata whenua have worked in partnership to develop whatever the new policy is. New Zealand has a horrible track record of immigration practices and policies. Exhibit 1 would be colonisation. Exhibit 2 would be the dawn raids, where we took in a whole lot of cheap labour from the Pacific when it suited us and then turned around and booted them all out when we didn't want them anymore. Recent events, the migrants that got stuck here during COVID who weren't eligible for any sort of government support but couldn't return home either. The awful situation some of those REC workers find themselves in. So I think, this is actually a missed opportunity for us to have a real meaningful wānanga and discussion about New Zealand's immigration policy. And the trouble with that is that, it gets politicised and it gets used as a racist soapbox for people to whip up xenophobia about. And so, I think something like a Royal Commission of Inquiry where people get to come in and there's a layer of officiality and protection for, people like refugees who have often come from really traumatic situations and who are frightened of authority and all of that sort of stuff, who, are at risk because you might be allowed in with one government and then the next government wants to boot you out sort of thing. If we had a Royal Commission of Inquiry where refugees, where tangata whenua, where businesses could all come and have a real wānanga and discussion about immigration, that would be a great thing. But from what's been put forward so far, it's hard to, if you were to ask most Māori, I think most Māori would say that they would rather have 300 refugees than 300 rich people come to Aotearoa.
Well, this is the issue, right, is it sounds good, and we've been saying for years we need more high-quality migrants who will bring investment. If you think about it, the only long-term migrant under those sort of rich investor categories that I can think of who's actually created a lot of jobs here is Kim.com, right? It's
serious, eh?
Yeah, I mean,
for the judicial economy.
Even leaving aside all of those other things, that's a guy who spends money in a country, right? Yeah. Most of the people that we get under those investor classes, it's ridiculous stuff. Like, you can buy 3 years worth of government bonds worth $5 million, and that's you investing in the economy. I mean, the problem New Zealand has is not that it can't sell bonds to people. And the idea is, it's based on trickle down, right? It's these people will spend their money in the economy. Peter Thiel is never here and so never spends money in the economy.
What about that Russian oligarch that brought Waiwera and said he was going to invest and, renovate it, and now it's just like a dump.
Yeah, and then we talk about these low-value migrants who are wiping our great-grandparents' butts and doing all the stuff that none of us want to do. You can't, and we say they're low value, but I think if the pandemic showed anything, it's that the so-called low value workers and the essential workers are very, very similar. And that, working not in filth, that doesn't just sort of happen. And we don't even have the settings right now. They say that they're letting in too many low value migrants. One branch of an Indian restaurant in Wellington has closed down while the other branches continue because MB has told them that they should hire local Indian chefs, not Indian chefs. Which, you know, that's insane, right? I mean, I could head over there with, you know, my box of Patak's curry powder or something and give it my best go. But, you know, that's actually a skill. Yeah. It's not, you know.
It's not PR.
I think it's true.
It's not a super valuable skill like PR, but it's still highly skilled.
I think it's true that, you know, our immigration settings has created a low-wage society. But that's not because of the immigrants. That's because the government has let them be exploited by businesses that want to pay less than the minimum wage.
Yeah, and I think that if it was just about immigration, you know, then we would see what we'd see is something like the United States, where you have very, very low wage jobs and you have very, very high paid jobs. But we don't have very, very high paid jobs in New Zealand, not compared with, you know, our peers in Australia or similar. Is it Karen McNamara? Kate McNamara in the Herald wrote a great piece where she said, you know, the government was saying that our 5% of workers on temporary visas is incredibly high in the OECD. But she pointed out, you know, 2/3 of the OECD is in the EU, where they have essentially unrestricted movement and visa-free entry, and their migrant worker figures aren't any lower than ours.
Let's, before we skip to the end, talk about David Seymour, who had, what was the event he had? He had another event at the Waterfront Theatre over the weekend, charged people, I think, $25 a head, packed it out, filled the coffers, good kind of grassroots party stuff. I don't know, it was he who said, or someone in the party, maybe the president, saying they want 20 MPs. That's the goal. They've got 10 at the moment. And a couple of interesting policy lines, one about quite a smart triangulation in terms of talking about paying teachers more, but obviously a more performance pay basis. And then the other one,
TERF.
The other one, the TERF.
Yeah,
we're not getting into that.
The Training Education Reward.
Oh, I
Fund.
see.
Teacher Education Reward Fund.
Only David Seymour could offer to pay teachers more while at the same time completely insulting teachers.
Yeah, well, it's quite smart oppositioning. Then also there was the thing about electoral law reform, you know, which some of what Andrew Geddes wrote a good piece for us. Some of it seems a little bit curly logic, but it sort of has it's kind of setting your own path a bit, rather than just being reacting to every, you know, the old hoary cliche of barking at every passing car. Is David Seymour, do you think, Annabelle, doing a bit what Russell Norman and Mitsuri Ature did for a while when Labour was in the doldrums and starting to perform the function of the opposition?
Well, that's the problem with National being such a wreck at the moment, is that it makes him look like the credible opposition leader. One thing I have to say, Ben, I reckon you've probably been surprised about this too, is how tidy he's managed to keep his MPs. I think we were all expecting them to roll into Parliament and for the wheels to start to fall off. You know, someone wigging out outside a restaurant for a table or, you know, some sexting or something, and nothing. They've all behaved themselves.
Yeah, about a month. It was probably only about a month into the election, and there was a headline, you know, new ACT MP was deported from Fiji, and I was like, yeah, this checks out. This train's never late. And then I read the story, and it said, you know, Simon Court was barred from re-entering Fiji by the authorities after he repeatedly raised health and safety concerns at a government building site. And since then, the state of wonder has continued. That these people, seemingly plucked from random out of the New Zealand countryside, have managed to basically stay without incident. And that's credit where it's due. That's the person who's I think, whip and deputy leader is my former colleague, Brooke Van Velden. And folks, you got to hand it to her.
She's keeping them on a tight leash, maybe?
They are straighty 180s.
All right. I think that's enough.
Same.
Thank you for joining us on this Once in a Generation
Cut it.
podcast. Thank you, Tina, especially, and also Annabelle and Ben. And we will return with more sizzling hot takes in probably a fortnight.
Woo!
Are you curious about how business can be better? I'm Simon Pound, and I host Business is Boring, a podcast where I kōrero with some of the most interesting people in entrepreneurship, commerce, and making things happen. Tune in to Business is Boring every Tuesday, brought to you by the Spin-Off Podcast Network in partnership with Spark Business Lab.
Talofa lover, I'm Madeline Chapman, editor at The Spin-Off. If you have the means, consider supporting our high-quality journalism by becoming a Spin-Off member. Sign up now at thespinoff.co.nz/donate.
The Spin-Off Podcast Network.